Okay, welcome to our September edition of the Service Dog Handler Chat. We have a small group here, and hopefully, we're going to keep this somewhat short. But we have a really important topic today for about alternate handlers. And first of all, I just want to stress that the laws when it comes to alternate handlers are few and far between, right? It's not mentioned much. I think it's mentioned once or twice in the ADA stuff. So it is legal to use an alternate handler, but there isn't any specific like guidelines behind what makes it legal. So one of the things we wanted to talk about a little bit is some ethical values that not necessarily I have or Cindy has, but like as a collective, we may not all agree on the same things. But I mean, that's the point of the discussion, right? So you don't have to take my opinion. And so we want to kind of start off with a simple question. And anybody can answer it first. You can type it in chat. You can kind of unmute. But so a simple question is, let's give one example where you in the past have used an alternate handler. Nice, easy, simple. And so I will share one. I had to, what was it? I was I was going in for some kind of test. I don't remember. Um, some place where my dog couldn't go. It must have been my MRI because that's the only test I can think of that I've done without my dog, right? But so going in for an MRI, and I had a another client of mine that was training a service dog, but he wasn't ready to work yet, or she wasn't ready to work yet. So, but she knew how I handled my dog. So this was when Azul was working. So she already knew how I would handle my dog because we were training her dog to work the same way. So she went with me and she sat in the lobby with Azul during the test, but that way I had Azul to help me, get to that place, to that waiting room. And in that particular area, they have a special waiting room for this test that only has like 5 chairs in it. So it was plenty fine for her to be in this small waiting room with the dog while I did my test. And then he was there when I came back out. And the reason being that I felt that need, because like nowadays, I probably would just leave my dogs at home for that because I'm in a better place now. But at that time, my balance was so bad, and I knew I would have a migraine. Like I was walking into it with a migraine, had very low migraine treatments going on at that time, like it wasn't being effective yet. And I knew the actual act of the MRI was going to enhance that. So there was a very good chance I was going to be able to walk out and like not be able to focus, not be able to see, not be able to walk straight, not be able to do anything. So I wanted him there for me when I left. Right. So it's a nice, simple one. Her only role was to sit there and keep him tucked in a chair. He was positioned before I walked away because I let her position him while I was in the waiting room being ready to call back, and she just sat there. And I knew that she had the skills. This is something we're going to talk about later, so I'm just going to throw it in here. I knew she had the skills that if my dog showed any signs of stress, she would recognize them. And she could get him to walk out to the car, and she had access to the car, right? So she could take him through the small part of the hospital out the nearest door without any trouble, right? So those were my requirements. I wanted somebody who knew how to handle my dog, somebody who felt comfortable enough just sitting there, and somebody that could get the dog out to the car if need be, for whatever reason. The dog had to pee, the dog had to whatever, she could handle it, right? So that's when I've used an alternate handler in the past. Anybody else want to share a story? See Cindy's hand raised.
Okay, so I have used an alternate handler. Ended up getting stuck going to the ER. I'd gone to an appointment and got sent down to the ER, which totally sucks. And I didn't have anybody with me except my service dog. And so I really didn't have anybody at that point that I could call and say, can you come sit with me and take my dog out to go potty if he needs to go out to go potty, and keep him on his schedule. So rather than keep him with me and have him continue tasking and having the ER staff continue to freak out over it, I called an alternate handler to come collect him, which happened to be my mother. Unfortunately, I think Penny and I have discussed this on multiple occasions. My mother does not know how to walk any dog on a leash. And Nick, um, how
Can be a
shall
bit spicy.
he can be, well, it's not just that he can be spicy. If he can take advantage of a situation, he does. He's an opportunist.
He
And
thinks he's a husky at heart.
right. And so he decided to pull my mom through the ER at Kaiser. And I got told how horrible he was when I went to go pick him up. And I knew it wasn't because he was being horrible. It was because he was with grandma and grandma doesn't know how to run him. So, but that was a choice where that was a situation where
You didn't feel like you had any other
I
alternative. She
didn't
was
feel
the one who
right.
could
I
come
didn't
pick
have
him up.
another option, and the best option for everybody was just to get him out of there and let him go play with his Auntie Rosie, and just let him have the afternoon off to be a dog. So sometimes I think that's an appropriate choice to make. And the alternate handler was my mom for those few minutes while she walked him outside. And and if I'd had my halter with me, I probably would have put it on him just so she could manage the dog out to the car, but I didn't. Um, so, it depends on the situation. And again, that situation, it would
Yep.
not have been productive for him to come back in. It was better for him to just leave and go play.
And that's a definite possibility anytime we are admitted to the hospital or in the ER situation. Just depending on what's going on, there may not be any tasks the dog can do in that situation. So therefore, they don't really need to be there, or there may be like we
Well,
simply are incapable of managing them.
or if you don't have somebody else that can take them out to go to the bathroom, that's
Right.
a situation where you don't necessarily want them in the facility, or depending on why you're there. It just, you have to.
Right. How long you plan to be there, all that good stuff kind of equals into it. But right, does anybody else have another story of an alternate handler use? I know Julie uses alternate handlers a little bit differently because of her disability.
Yeah, we're kind of trying something new recently where Earl is attached to my caretaker because she has to push my manual chair, and the leash, when Earl was attached to my chair, the leash, that would sag kept getting caught up in the chair. So we just started trying to work with Earl being attached to Kelly. And then that means that she can take him to go potty and to do things without having to um, undo it from my chair. So we're kind of working more on that. And then when I'm in a procedure at the doctor that I don't necessarily want Earl to be in the room for, um, he goes with either my caretaker or my father, who also helps me.
Yep. So Julie's in the situation that she really doesn't leave her house without a helper, right? So in that situation, that's almost like a service dog for a child. The child really, it's a little bit different, but so a child isn't really in control of the service dog, and there has to be an alternate handler, adult that is at least supervising. Even if the child's giving the directions to the dog, there has to be an adult that is responsible, right? In Julie's situation, she's still actually the handler of Earl. The caretaker is just holding the leash. So Julie is still controlling Earl most of the time with verbal and hand signal and whatnot. And the caretaker is only managing Earl, like if she's taking him out to go potty or if she's sitting in a waiting room or something.
And that's also part of the difficulty, because the caregiver is also wanting, while she's holding the leash, she's wanting to manage every aspect of Earl, where Julie is the one who should be cueing
We're
Earl.
going to get to that one a little bit more, right?
Mm.
And I know Ashlyn's typing. Shauna, did you have an example you want to share?
Oh, gee, I'm trying to think because everyone has kind of already touched base on the medical points where either planned or unplanned, you need a a secondary handler. There was one time I was going to go to a dear friend wedding in another state, and unfortunately my lungs decided to get stupid, and so I ended up in the hospital right before this wedding. And so I had to text her, like, by the way, I'm in the hospital. I'm so sorry. I'll try to get out before your wedding since I'm going to be your best man. And thankfully, this my friend drove like 2 hours to come and visit me and take out my dog, because I was out of state. I had nobody around me, and I learned very quickly that if I had put down, a potty pad for this dog inside, she would just do a lovely downstay on it, and she it just did not compute for her to like pee inside.
I think that's what Azul would do. He would hold it for hours.
Yeah, it was kind of a fascinating, like, okay, mental note, I need to work on this. But those are kind of the moments of like, oh, I'm in trouble, versus things that you can kind of plan
Well,
ahead
and
of
how
time.
often do you travel with a potty pad? I mean, I don't. I have some in the training center, but they're sure not in my car.
Yeah.
Where,
But
like, if
that's
I did have to go into the hospital, I could grab one and take one with me.
Well, in hospital settings, like, you can find one for humans that work.
yeah.
Right, that's true.
um you can just put down a chuck pad, and it works just the same. But my poor dog was just so confused. um but I also have, even out of a medical setting, there's always a chance, if I'm out and something happens and I have to take medication or bolt away from my dog, that somebody needs to take possession of my dog, um, until we can be reunited, and um, he can start working again. And you know that's
Mhm.
always, so the people that I do have in my day-to-day life kind of know the drill of, like, this is when you hold the leash and this is what you say. um,
Mhm.
and
We're
so it
gonna
was
get into
really,
that a little bit as well,
yeah,
right? Because that's an important part of the discussion.
yeah.
So Ashlyn says that she will have her dad is her like number one alternate handler. Her mom will do it sometimes too, but her dad will hold the dogs if she has to go like into a tight bathroom where there just isn't a room because she's got her motorized chair, and if there isn't room for a dog, and so he might hold the leash in that situation. And so Azul was actually my second service dog, but like a lot of times I refer to him as my first one because right now he's my older one, right? My mostly retired one. So Azul is a husky with the swooshy tail, and he's pretty large. So while you can take your service dog with you to, like, say, the Chinese buffet, I don't particularly like to take him because his tail doesn't stop wagging and it's above the buffet. And I mean, I'm used to eating dog hair. That's my choice. I live with dog hair, right? But I don't want to do that to everybody else. So the few times we go to the Chinese buffet, my husband or my daughter will keep him under the table while I go up and get food. Now, could I use
And
help getting food? Probably, but I'm also usually okay by myself, and it's usually we try to sit in line of sight so he can watch me underneath, kind of thing. But still,
I
the idea of I just don't want that swoopy tail. Now, Belle's low enough. Belle, I would have no problem taking through a buffet line because her tail is more down or back, and she's not as tall. But so I'm
I've been both those situations with Poe because she was so giant at 120 pounds. She's twice the size of Nick, and I've if the bathroom was tight, I would leave her with whoever I was with and in a downstay under the table. And the guy I was dating, when she was doing most of her work, liked to go to Sweet Tomatoes at least once a week, and so I would park her under the table and he'd go get his food, and then when he came back I would go get my food, and she'd just stay in a downstay under the table until the
that's
man
what we do.
until the manager decided he had to help me with my tray, and I'm like, just let me get to my table and then I will deal with my stuff.
Mhm.
But it's important to have those kind of backup plans, and then also to teach your dog to go with a stranger if
That's our next point,
yes.
right? So our
So
next point is training focused, right? So I have some pretty strict training requirements for anybody I hand Azul to. A little bit more lenient with Belle, but still, like you, Azul is more opportunistic than Belle, right? He's more likely to say, "Oh, you don't know what you're doing, and I'm just going to pull you all over the place." Right? Belle is not going to do that. Um, she's not going to want to walk away from me if somebody tries to take her away from me outside, but we're working on that one. But anyway, so what training requirements, let's do people first, do you have for your alternate handlers? What are the core like must-haves? And I'm sure some of us have some basic ones. Like I'm sure we would all say we need to feel that our dog is safe with that person, right? That's a given. We are very protective of our service dogs, right? I know that one. We all want to make sure they're well cared for. So I want somebody, preferably, that at least knows my dog. And depending on what they are going to be doing with my dog, the more skill they need. So, for example, if in Cindy's case, I just need them to collect my dog and take them out, I have multiple service dog clients that I work with that most of them could even take Azul and get him out to the car, right? Potty into the car. Um, but still, I'm not going to let a stranger I don't know do that, right? um, but then if they actually need to handle for any kind of other long-term stuff, I need to know that A, they're comfortable with reading stress signs, B, they're good at making decisions like do I exit or do I stay, and C, they have thick enough skin to tell everybody else, no, the dog's working, you can't pet them. Because, well, Azul is super, super social and will say hi to anybody. That's not a choice I want an alternate handler making, right? Like, so my husband walks him. Oh, not in a working capacity, right? My husband might take him out on a trail walk or something. And if he's letting him greet people, that's Azul's off duty. I don't care. But my husband actually would not make a good alternate handler and has no interest in being an alternate handler and probably would be my last choice to keep one of my dogs in a facility. Right? Just because he just doesn't know their capabilities or how to communicate the needs beyond the more advanced stuff, right? He doesn't know how to ask them to get under a chair. He doesn't know that Azul prefers to go in facing forward and crawl under the side and come back out. And Belle prefers to back in. Like he just doesn't know that kind of stuff, nor does he care. So even though I trust my husband with walking Azul on just a regular pet down the trail walk, I wouldn't trust him in a facility where Azul had to behave like a service dog.
Well, I actually don't generally trust Ken with Nick just because he's pet dog behaviors, and which
Right.
is
Well,
fine.
that's my husband. It's he knows
I
the pet dog behaviors, and
I
that's all
will
he
hand,
knows.
if we're not going to do anything, I will hand him the leash, and there's nothing expected of Nick other than, hey, I'm going to go run to the bathroom. Can you just hold the leash because I don't feel like dealing with the dog for.
Right.
However, I had a situation a while ago where I had to have a test done, and the person rooming me basically fibbed. He told me there was not enough room for a visitor in the room, and there was a extra chair for a visitor in the room, and there was room under the chair for my service dog. I think he saw the service dog and decided that he wasn't going to room the service dog. It would have been handy to have him because I dropped stuff that I needed Nick to retrieve. So, anyways, Nick got stuck under a chair in the hallway at Kaiser with Ken. I had put him under there. I had him all nice and situated, and that is a situation where I would leave him that way. But generally speaking, like I would hand Julie Nick's leash, but and because Julie knows how to manage Nick, even though he raids her cookie jar.
Yeah. So my questioning was going to be, and you can finish this because this is kind of where you're going. That's why I want to get the question out there. Is what training do you absolutely need your alternate handlers to have before you're passing the leash over to them?
Well, basically anybody that I work with knows how I work. And so like, if you work with me, you know what I'm going to ask your dogs to do. And so I will generally, my friends, my service dog friends, I'm pretty comfortable handing my leash over to. But if there's somebody that routinely is a pop and jerk type person, they're not getting my leash, period, ever. And if they're somebody that's going to just be super, super harsh, it's going to crush my dog, they're not getting my leash. If it's somebody that I know is going to actually work with, you know, I'm just really, I'm really picky. And I know Ken's not going to do anything he might get frustrated with Nick and he might let Nick take advantage of the situation, but I know he's not going to pop and jerk him. And so there's that criteria. And Julie knows how I work the dogs. So Julie, with all her limitations, can still manage Nick without a problem. She can manage Earl without a problem. And so I feel comfortable with her managing Nick, especially if it's a situation where we have switched dogs. And if I'm doing Earl and she's doing Nick, we can usually figure out a way to make both dogs happy. And, you know, worst case scenario, somebody's rating somebody's cookie jar. Earl might be rating mine or Nick might be rating hers. It happens. But, you know, that's the worst thing that happens. That's not the end of the world.
I like to do that from a training perspective because it helps our dogs get used to working with other people and somebody else taking the leash.
I,
So,
I,
like, if I were in a work capacity, such as, you know, say a hospital setting and there for an appointment, I wouldn't just trade dogs with somebody unless there was an emergent situation, like, so Julie's passed out and you need to manage Nick, that's different, right? But
right.
unless there's an emergent situation, I wouldn't just trade dogs in that situation. But when we're doing training in a group training, I will very commonly tell everybody, all right, switch dogs. Like I'll
Well,
claim somebody else's dog and then say, all right, go claim somebody else's and till everybody has somebody else's dog.
the other
Just to
thing we
practice that.
routinely do, aside from stays, the other thing that we routinely do is if we see somebody in uniform, fireman, paramedic, ambulance, postman, whatever, if it looks somewhat like a uniform, we will generally ask if they have time to say hello and make sure that the dogs are comfortable. I had to stop some firemen in Roswell to ask them if they would pat the dog, and the one fireman was like, "You're asking me to pat the dog? You mean you're asking me to? You call that a favor?" And I'm like, "Yes, please. You
I
have
need
no
to do that
idea."
more with Belle. Belle's had very limited experience with that.
Because that means that because Nick will, I mean, both Nick and Earl are going to worry if they see something going on, and there's probably going to be a little bit of leash pressure to get them moving. But I don't want them freaking out if somebody is trying to remove them from a situation. I don't want them getting upset that I'm being assisted by somebody while I'm laying on the ground. So it's important that they know that the firemen, the EMTs, everybody is a friend.
Yep. So that's an emergent situation where the leash may be handed to somebody without training. And I mean, in an emergency situation, we got to do what needs to happen in the emergency, right? But so in non-emergency times, you've listed a couple of really good things there. I want to just know Ashlyn said her dad always tells people, like if somebody asks to pet the dog, her dad always makes them ask Ashlyn or refers people will ask her, it's her dog, you know, which is really good because it kind of, you know, that keys in on, and that's what Julie and her caretaker need to start working on. I'm fairly new caretaker, but so the idea that Julie is still in charge of of Earl, whether she has the leash or not, and the caregiver is there as a backup for when Julie cannot manage Earl.
Right. And if Julie, and we've discussed that this is an
And we're
option.
talking about Julie like she's not here, but sorry,
Yeah.
Julie.
We've also discussed the option of at certain times Julie using my scooter so she doesn't have to, so she can be self-propelled and practice with Earl that way.
Mhm.
Um, because it's very frustrating when you cannot push your own wheelchair or your own, when you cannot be mobile yourself. I just want to point out, Ashlyn says she wants somebody who knows the basic cues to take the leash. And I think that's a really important thing. The other thing to consider when you're teaching your dog basic cues is to try and use common English words. I get really frustrated with these people who think it's just super cool to train in French or German because that's
Like
what
Bubs
they
knows
do.
sit, but she also knows plop a squat. I
But
say plop a squat, but if somebody else asks her to sit and they're holding her leash, she's gonna sit. That common terminology helps when you're passing your leash off.
right. And so, I mean, it may sound really cool that you're doing Mondo or you're doing Schutzhund or something where they do train in German, but even there's no reason to not use common terms when you're training a service dog. And there's a lot of reasons to use common
My
terms.
exception to that is my recall.
Well, that's
I
different.
don't use a common word for recall because I want to be able to call my dogs without calling every other dog around us. Right? Not that my dogs get off leash, but like I don't want to have to say Azul come and then have whatever other dog that I might be trying to call him away from come run into me as well.
I think
Right?
Sean's question.
Go ahead, Shauna.
Oh, no, I didn't want to interrupt. I just had
You're
something to
fine.
add for this, but keep going. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, so my recall is totally different. And I tell all my clients too, use something other than come. Unless you're training formal obedience and you need come to be your recall cue because somebody's going to judge you on it, right? Um, Pick a different word for that and then I want my alternate handlers to be able to know what that is. So I make sure that, if there's going to be a situation, even if they're in a fenced in area, which like generally my alternate handlers are not going to take my dogs into a fenced in area unless they're my children that are all adults that come to visit and they know Azul and they know how to get him back already. Right. But but I agree with you, Cindy, like all the basics. Azul actually will ignore a sit from any stranger because he doesn't like to sit. So he generally will do a down when he's asked to sit, which I allow as somebody else. I'm not going to hand my leash to anyone that's going to get mad at that. But let's
And
go Shauna first and then Julie.
is that a sit or a sit?
It doesn't matter. He doesn't like any of them.
Knows what I'm talking
Because he's
about.
got the fuzzy butt and the fuzzy butt on the slippery floor, he slides. And so strangers used to ask him to do that for greeting when he was younger, and like in a public place. When I told him to go say hi, they'd say, "Oh, can you sit?" And I'm like, "Not here. He can't." Ask him to do anything else. Ask him to shake. Ask him to do it. And I will give us some other examples of things that they can ask him to do
Right.
versus sit. But that's everyone's default. And so Azul intentionally will ignore anyone else asking him to sit. I'm the only one he'll sit for because he knows I'm not going to ask him to do it unless it's absolutely required. And if I ask him to sit, I'm always going to be okay with him choosing to go into a down. Go ahead, Shauna.
So I guess for requirements for an alternate handler, when I need the most is in situations where I can't advocate for myself, and probably in medical settings often where maybe getting public access pushback, just because they don't understand. So one of the things that makes me feel a lot better is that the handler, they don't have to know be
I know
as
the
well
basics
versed.
of the laws.
Yeah, they don't have to be as well versed in ADA service dog law, but have the basics and have the basic vocabulary and be able to
Stand up for themselves and your dog.
yeah, exactly. I think that was, I agree with all the other points that have been brought up, but I think that would be the one thing that I would
Yeah.
add,
That's a
depending,
great
That,
That
depending
is
on the
really
situation.
important. I want my alternate handlers to at least know the basics. At least be able to say, this is a service dog. Their person ran to the bathroom. They couldn't take them because XYZ, whatever. Generally, my dogs are going to the bathroom with me because I can usually make it work because I'm not in a chair. but even a teeny tiny small stall, I can get Azul in typically. But so there are those few situations, but you're right. I want the alternate handler to be able to speak up for my rights to have my service dog there and my rights to choose to leave them with that person because of XYZ. Go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, that was actually something I was going to bring up as well. And when I have the choice of an alternative handler, um, you know, aside from like emergency situations, I also want that handler to know the hand signals because when Earl was young, I started him off with a lot more hand signals than vocal. And I still have to use a lot of that because of my respiratory issue. And so some of the cues are, you know, not necessarily common. And I mean, it kind of is frustrating.
It
Um,
frustrates the dog when they can't read the human's body language because they're so used to looking at our body language.
Mhm.
yeah. So I want the person that the alternative handler to be kind of familiar with the concept of hand cues and be conscious of how much they're waving around their arms,
Right, that's a good point.
because
Because so
Earl
many people
is
talk with their hands.
very much so. So, depending on the situation, um, I definitely wouldn't choose to hand Earl off to somebody that is very um, you know,
Talks with
movement
their hands.
based. Yeah. Or even just body language. If they're a nervous, shaky person in general, Earl's going to want to either task or it's going to, because of my seizures and shaking, he kind of gets
Right. It
in that
flusters
mode
them.
too. Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
ideally, I want a person that is kind of self aware of their own body language.
I'm
And
really lucky there that I had 5 kids, and of my 5 kids, I have 3 that are major, major dog lovers. And of those 3 kids, so they haven't seen my daughter Heather. Like Belle's met Heather twice, I think, in her life now, maybe 3 times, right? My daughter Heather arrived yesterday to stay for a week. Like, Heather can totally take Belle and do anything because Heather knows so much my body language, and her natural body language almost mirrors mine. So that makes it a lot easier, and I don't worry about Heather doing any of my dogs. In fact, she drove my car home and brought Azul to work for me today. So, I mean, total trust there. And even though they don't have a huge relationship with her, they love her because she's easy to predict because her body language is much like mine. Go ahead, Shauna.
Kind of bouncing off of that, the other thing I thought of is, in addition to just kind of having basic cues of, the sit and the down and the walk nicely beside you, um, also if there are any tasks that you as the handler need the dog to do if you're not able to do it for yourself,
Mhm.
situations, if the handler or if the alternate handler, let me start that sentence over again.
I know where you're going. Go
Thank
ahead.
you. Okay. What I would want is that I would want, my ideal alternate handler to be able to have the one or two tasks, um, that they could cue the dog to do for me if I'm not able to cue them myself. And also the understanding of, you can't ask my dog to pick up something for you that doesn't work.
okay,
Yeah.
so let me tell you what happens with Julie and I, because we probably, well, when we're doing good, when we're not having health flares and everybody has transportation, we probably see each other at least twice a week. And last winter sometime, we were at the mall and we had a couple other handlers with us and her dad. And Julie has this thing where she passes out. And she passed out once. We got Earl on her lap. I know how to cue him on her lap. We had to get her from one end of the mall to the other end of the mall and get her dad to get the car. During all of this, Earl had to get stuffed in the car while we managed Julie. And we actually put, we don't do this very often, but we do this occasionally. We actually put Nick on Julie's lap for DPT, and I've cued Earl to pick stuff up for me, and she's cued Nick to pick stuff up. We don't do it very often. We want them responding to us, but it's also handy when you have
You know, I do that same thing though. Like because my office assistant Athena is she's got Roz, a golden retriever that I basically trained, right? I fostered her for 6 months and finished up her service dog training and did board and train with her when she was a puppy. So like I basically have trained Roz her whole life and now she belongs to my office assistant and our disabilities are so similar, so our tasks are so similar. So we kind of swap out dogs. Azul can go work for her and Ross can come work for me because the tasks are exactly the same.
right.
We define it on who's holding the leash in that moment. So if we trade leashes, the dogs know who they're working for.
Yeah,
We
that
both have migraines. The dogs alert to both of our migraines because Roz was alerting to my migraines before she went to live with Athena, right? So she can alert to both of our migraines. Um, she can alert to both of us having dizzy spells. But they will alert to whoever's holding their leash in that
Right.
situation.
yeah, that makes sense. I guess what I meant is like if the person is able-bodied, like don't do tasks,
Right.
don't ask
Don't
my
ask
dog
them
to
to do
task for
tasks
the
just for the
person.
fun of doing it. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
totally get
Don't
that.
task for tricks
Yep.
sort of deal. That's what I
So
meant.
let me explain. So we had a situation when Shauna and I had lunch. I had put Nick back in his crate, and I think Harper had tried on Nick's jacket at that point, and the jacket was handed back to me, and I dropped it. And I Nick was I didn't have access to Nick, and it was like, okay, I kind of want to cue the dog, but it's not my dog
Totally.
cue, and and
It's
Harper.
hard to not do it when you're used to doing
It's
it all
hard
the
to not
time.
it's hard to not do it. And then the other thing that comes up that never gets discussed or hardly ever gets discussed is you can teach your dog all these great cues, but if you're not using those tasks, it's very hard sometimes to start adding that task back into your regular life. Like right now, Nick should be out here laying on my quilt, his stack of quilts, his with the with no peas underneath. But apparently he's sleeping on my bed, which he's not really supposed to be when he's supposed to have the door closed and be out here.
But he's still recovering from vacation.
Right. He's still in recovery modes and he's not barking.
If you
So
needed him, he'd be there in a heartbeat.
right. But it's just one of those things. Sometimes it's been difficult getting back into. Yeah, you're doing all these. He's doing all this mobility stuff. Now I need to remember to ask you to pick stuff up for me, pick stuff up for me, pick stuff up for me, and we need to get back into working on the alerts that we were working on. And so I'm still having to teach him how to beg. That's
Okay.
that's going to be a long process because he learned so well not to beg. And
So I had Belle out the other day and like I went to grab a straw and a second straw flew out and hit the floor. So of course I had her pick it up for me so I could throw it away. But as she was handing it back to me, I dropped like the little number placard that they give you to put on your table so they can bring food out. So she picked up that. And then like right where both of those items dropped, there was like a cup lid that hadn't been used but had fallen on the floor. And it wasn't mine, but like I was walking to the trash already anyways, right? So I had her pick that up too. People sitting next to us are like, wow, this is Service Dog Cleans the Restaurant. She's great. I'm like, well,
yeah,
yeah, it was kind of cute that she did it. No, we didn't need to do it. We didn't put it there. But it doesn't hurt to sometimes throw in a task like that. But
but
I'd
then
be
then I would
upset if somebody else purposely dropped something and then tried to ask my dog to retrieve it for him.
that's not okay.
Right? Even if they were my alternate handler, right? Even if they were my alternate handler, I wouldn't want them to do that. But you're right. If I drop something, I want them to know enough to give the dog enough leash to do the task for me, right?
Right.
So that's the good point. That's a really good point that we didn't think of.
And but especially when you're teaching the task, anytime you might need that task, you need to step back and say, okay, I need to ask the dog to do that, because we forget to do that all the time. So, there's a little note here. Ashlyn said that she doesn't use heel for walking next to me. And I don't, and I'm going to guess that Shauna doesn't, because our dogs are learning a formal, hyper stylized heel.
Yeah. My dogs have
And,
heel and then they have walk nice. And
and
walk nice is a very loose heel, right?
well,
Stay within about, they're usually on an 18-inch traffic lead at that point that's attached to my waist belt or my shoulder strap. And so they have about 18 inches they can maneuver around me in their choice. If there's an obstacle, they can drop behind me, they can switch sides, they can do either freely. That's my normal walking. What other people would call heel is my walk nice.
yeah,
And they have a formal heel.
and what I'm finding is that the more we do these exercises that are related to getting focused, a stylized focused heel, the more I'm getting it when I'm not asking for it. So
I get it a lot from Bell, whether I ask for it or not as well.
yeah, and I mean, he moves really well with me, and Shauna has the same over the shoulder leash that I have, and I found my shorter one. And it's really nice to be able to walk through the store with your over the shoulder leash and not have to hold your leash and just have your dog walking next to you. And
I remember the first time I realized that it had been about 5 minutes since I noticed Azul.
mhm.
Right? Like, I actually turned around to make sure he was still with me. Because generally, like, there are some people that say you can't feel anything on a shoulder strap leash. Well, I have super sensitive nerves. I feel everything. If they stop to sniff something a little bit longer, if they're lagging behind, if anything, if they're distracted and their eyes turn, I feel that. Right? If they
Right. Well,
alter their pace for any reason, if they switch sides, I feel it long before um there's any need for me to do any action with that, right? They
well,
don't have to like just stop dead and have the leash pulled tight and hard stop me, right?
since
So
since May, I've been needing the mobility, the momentum pulls, and the counterbalance, and so more so than I was using it before. And I so I'm feeling Nick a lot more, and he actually likes that more, because he likes that. Ooh, let me lean in, let me lean in, let me lean in, and so I think that's
my
what
husky too. You want me to pull you? Sure, I'll pull you.
he's still a poodle. He's still a poodle.
hmm
So
But yeah, so I do want the alternate handlers to know enough about the task to even recognize the sign and even like, so I have a very clear, like, all done sign that I'll use. Like, I might use it to end a training session, but I also might use it to, like, if there's a medical alert happening and there's nothing I can do in that situation, you know, say I've already maxed out on meds, or say I was in the ER and then the medical alert was happening. Well, the dog knows the problem's still there. They still know that it's getting worse, so they may try to alert again and again and again. So I have my all done cue, right? That means we know stop for now, right? So I want my alternate handler to know that signal too, to say, you don't need to do this task right now. Whatever the task may be, if it's truly something, say I dropped something in the hospital or the nurse dropped something and it looked like it fell from me and maybe it was a needle, right? Something they just gave me a shot with. I don't want my dog to rush to pick that up, but I want the alternate handler to know, or at least to have some smarts as far as safety wise. Is this something the dog needs to be doing right now? Or do I need to tell him, nope, leave it? Go ahead, Shauna.
Uh, one other thing I thought of is I need my handler to know how to get my dog in and out of his gear. I use a balance assistance harness, which to me is, it's second nature. I have to go, like, anytime I'm out in public, I have to use that. Otherwise, it's a non-starter. But it
Mm-hmm.
looks fairly like intimidating at first to anybody else. And so practicing a few times, getting it on the and off the dog and using the cue, because the
That's a really good point.
Harper can get in and out of it, dress and undress himself, but there's still three buckles and that kind of thing of just
And it
making
would be
sure that
easier to take it off than it would be to put it on. But if they take it off, like say you're in a hospital bed. They take it off so your dog can relax a little bit, but now you're getting up and you need it, but you're not capable of putting it on in that moment. So
Yes.
yeah, having them able to do that, that's a really good point that I
Yeah.
hadn't thought of.
And vests as well, like any sort of thing that my
Mhm.
dog uses on a regular basis, or like booties. You know, the pavement
Right.
is so hot here a lot of the time that they have to take, I have to have my dog in booties, otherwise he will burn his paws so quickly. So just being able to be comfortable of more or less jamming my dog's feet into the booties.
Right. They have to
um,
have that basics. That's a good one. I wouldn't have thought of. Um,
And so, like, you're, to me, partially because I had a balance assist harness before, your harness makes a lot more sense than mine. But I've got all those buckles on mine because I wanted the left, I wanted, they only did, I think, the left sided neck buckle, or you could get both. And I wanted both. And so my harness comes completely apart and it's magnetic. So if you don't know how to put my harness on, you can't put it on right. I mean, you really have
well,
to know.
I've
And
got some harnesses like that that like my husband will pick it up. I'm like, what's this? I have two pieces. How do they go together?
right, exactly. And then like you even had Shauna even had to look at, so Nick and Earl both have the rough wear service dog vest, which is nice. It's light. It's really nice for summer. Um, and but it's also got those magnetic buckles, which I really like because they're easier for me to put on and off. And I noticed that when you were putting it on, you had to think a bit about it a little bit more than if you had those buckles on your regular harness. And if I buy, I'm hopefully going to get a new harness at some point. And when I do, I'm going to get those magnetic buckles. But, you know, it's something to think about when you're looking at gear and getting gear. Can somebody else put it on my dog or take it off my dog? Because I know some people that in my life that would have difficulty getting the harness off, even though it's
That's
just
also good training that the alternate handler needs to have, right? Or that the dog needs to have is that somebody else can do certain basic things. Somebody else can feed them and it's okay. You
right.
know, right situations, right? Maybe not out in public. I don't want even my family members feeding my dog in public.
Well,
They
I
could
thought,
take them to the car to feed them if they needed to, or, maybe if we were in a hospital room, maybe there, that would be something different, more like home. But, kind of general rule of thumb, I want them to be able to feed my dog dinner, and I want my dog to know that it's okay to eat that dinner.
well, so this is something interesting with Nick. He rarely eats out of a bowl because he gets most of his food through training throughout the day, and he gets a set amount of food. We cut it up in the morning. He gets that throughout the day. Whatever's left over goes in a topple, and he gets that at night. So he rarely eats out of a bowl. When I was in the hospital in August and he spent the week with Ken, he had to eat out of a bowl. He had competition from two other dogs, Poe and Ken's dog, Sophie. And I was worried because at home, if I have to separate him and Poe, or Poe will just crowd in on his food and take his dinner. And he ate all his meals without either dog crowding him for his meals while he was at Ken's that whole week. So they also you have to be aware that your dog may behave differently in a better way. And I was told he did the same thing when he stayed with my parents. So
Mhm.
you could end up with better behavior. You could end up with a juvenile delinquent, which is he usually tends to be.
All right. Can we switch tracks? Because
Yeah.
we're gonna run out of time here. Um, we talked a little bit, we touched a little bit on this one already, and like I don't want my alternate handler to do certain things, but like so what are some things that besides tasks, we've already talked about the tasks. So besides specific tasks that the alternate handler might just be doing for fun because they know the dog can do it, what might we not want an alternate handler to do? And I'll start it off with my easy one that I would dare say most of you agree with is that I don't want my alternate handler introducing my dogs to any other dogs. Even though my dogs are fairly dog friendly, Israel can be picky if dogs are obnoxious. He usually does well with the greetings. It's the prolonged obnoxious play that he doesn't tolerate. But I don't want my alternate handlers taking my dogs within 6 foot of another dog ever. I don't even want my husband doing it outside when they're on a nature walk trail, but he does it anyways. But so
He-
what else don't you want an alternate handler to do with your dog or for your dog or, anything like that?
This kind of goes back to knowing the, knowing your service dog laws, but I want I want the handler to know service dog laws, because I don't want them, if they are either panicked or don't know what else to do, to try and say that this is my service dog, like that the
Right.
alternative handler is the service dog.
Is the disabled person.
Thank you.
Yep,
Words
yep. You
are
don't want them to claim that they're the disabled person that they need the
yeah,
service dog.
exactly.
Yep. That's a good point. I wouldn't have thought of that one. But yeah, very, very valid. We want them to know those laws well enough to know that they have every right to hold that dog while you're having an MRI, even though they're not disabled.
but they don't have the right to claim the dog as their service dog.
Correct.
And even like, so California is really interesting. We do have laws where your dog can, if you're training, your in training dog has access, but your dog, and it doesn't have to be the disabled person or the trainer. It's going to be
Michigan has that law too.
it's
If
going to,
your
it has
dog
to be
is in training, like if somebody is training your dog, trainers have access,
so
public
like,
access
so this
rights.
was a situation that came up. So Julie was ill one day when we were going for Santa photos at a non-pet friendly mall. And her dad has always been the alternate handler. I've tried to work with him, and
He's
um,
not a very good alternate handler.
he's not my first choice for alternate handlers, because he's very old school and he's very set in his ways. And two women younger than him telling him how to run the dog just doesn't fly with him. I'm okay with that. I realize where we're at with him. So but what we wanted was, we were trying to get a group photo with the service dogs with Santa. And so and Julie couldn't make it. So he was the alternate handler. And that is legal in California, because I was also working with him, training him how to be the alternate handler in that
Right.
situation.
You were
And
in a training situation.
we're in a training situation. And so I think it's important. And I think it's important that people understand that just
Yeah,
because,
that's gonna be an iffy one based on states. Some states
right. But I
support that,
also
some
think,
are not.
I also think one of the things I kind of want my alternate handlers to know is that while the ADA says there is no federal license and no license, no federal law that says you have to have X license for your dog, that if your state offers a license for a service dog license for your dog, it most likely offers more protections than what the ADA offers. So that in a situation like a training situation like that, Earl, I don't remember if Earl had his service dog license at the time or not. Fresno County has some really weird laws, but having that service dog license buys you a little bit more
Leeway
protection,
with access for training.
leeway and protections, and it buys you a little bit more. Like California, the way California's laws are written, they mimic the ADA. The difference is California laws are criminal versus the ADA, which is civil. And so if I call like, we were at the zoo and the zoo screener told me that retrieving is not a valid service dog task. I'm like, I don't know a service dog that doesn't retrieve, and that is absolutely a valid task. And anyways,
Ashlyn agrees with you. Arkansas is the same way. Her dad can take her dog out in public for training purposes
Right.
without her there.
So what I
Um,
could have done in that situation, if they had tried to deny me access to the zoo, I could have called the police and filed a complaint against the zoo because other service dogs were being allowed into the zoo that I was with, but they were trying to deny my dog because I give retrieving because retreat as a task because retrieving doesn't give away my disability. And um, so I think, being able to answer those questions and having the alternate handler understand what those questions are and what they're about and what the state laws are regarding training and handling, I think those are important because I think at some point that we want Julie totally participating in the training with Earl, but at some point we're going to need to have her caregiver also be participating
right.
in the training where she's actually handling Earl without Julie.
Because Julie does pass out and sometimes does need
Right,
somebody else to handle the dog. And we do have to take those training opportunities. That was one of the things we wanted to talk about today, too. But making sure that we're training the alternate handlers with, all right, what's your chief role when you're the alternate handler? And when do you determine, like, so, well, I'm just going to use a case in point for me. With migraines, sometimes the mental focus fades. And in most situations, I need my dog to help me pull me to the car in that situation, right? My dogs are trained to do that. But in some situations, say I were there with my daughter and, maybe I was going to grab a mobility car and not need my dog to pull me to the car. Or like my kids know that if they need to tell me I'm about to do something dangerous, to tell me I'm about to do something dangerous, right? So if I'm about to do something wrong with my dog, I also want them to tell me that because it doesn't happen very often. But if I've pushed myself to my limits and I'm way over my limits, then I want them to know that line and like when do they trust their gut instinct with my dog or when do they trust what I'm telling them? And there's only a few people that can do that. Right?
right.
But that is a really good point. Like Julie's person is going to need to know when to just be silent and not try to cue Earl and when it's her turn to take over and cue Earl.
And
And
she's
that's something that's gonna be worked out differently for their team because it's gonna go bounce back and forth a little bit.
right. And I think it applies to all teams because there's times when I need Ken to just take over and just say, okay, rely on a service human instead of a service dog. Not because Nick can't do it, but sometimes you
The
just need,
spoons to manage the service dog become too much. And we
right,
already have the service dog with us. And like,
right,
so I will, just practice having one of my children manage one of my dogs. So I tend to do it. All right, this may come off sounding wrong and like I'm being an opportunist, but so Azul is mostly retired, still does some tasks. He just like he can have joint issues, especially on rainy days. But if he's feeling good, I am within my rights to work a tandem team. So I could take both dogs myself to wherever. Um, but in those situations, sometimes it's easier, like say if my daughter were with me, to have her manage one of the dogs.
but you need to take Azul so he can carry the bacon.
And in that situation, generally, it's going to be more like Julie met with her caregiver holding the leash, but me actually verbally managing the dog. And so, like, my dogs are trained, they can tandem on the same side or tandem on opposite sides. So, if my daughter was holding one of the leashes, the dog would be between us for the leash that she's holding, right? So that I could still cue the dog verbally. That's going to be a very rare situation. But I mean, going back to what I don't want my like I want to know that my handlers should not take the dogs away from me unless I ask them to take the dog away from me. Right? Don't just decide that it's time for a potty break and take the dog out. Right? Check with me If if I'm unconscious, it's one thing, right? If I'm recovering from surgery or something, but generally I'm not going to have my dog there in that situation. But if there's something like that, then they need to know that it's okay to step out and take the dog. Or, I don't want them to cue my dog to do a retrieve for me,
Right.
right? I don't want them to tell my dog what to do in those situations unless like they really need to control the situation. Something bad's going to happen if they don't, right? Otherwise, I want them to let me cue the dog. Go ahead, Cindy.
I was just going to tell you it's 4:15 Central.
Yeah, I know. I'm kind of watching it. I got to get my dogs moving. So go ahead, Shauna.
One thing I want my handler or my alternate handler to have a level head, um, both towards my dog and towards the public, so that they aren't, flying off the handle or making things,
Making rash decisions because they're fearful.
yes, or
Yep.
angry or whatever, both for like the physical and psychological safety of my own dog, but also to not make things more difficult for me as a service dog handler team in the future and for other service dog teams in the future. Because whether we want it or not, all of our behavior in public that
Yep. It reflects
influences
on the
what
whole
people think.
community, like it or not. It doesn't
Yeah.
just reflect on us.
So
When there's
I,
a dog behaving badly, we all pay for it.
yeah.
A dog behaving great, we all reap those benefits.
So I want my alternate handler to be able to, be kind of level headed in all of those situations and be, yeah, be good.
And not panic. Yep, I get that. Is there any other like behavior specific things you don't want your alternate handler cueing your dog?
I don't want them grabbing my leash if I'm holding the leash,
That's true.
or my harness, or my dog in any way.
Unless maybe they see a safety risk we didn't know.
Right. But generally speaking,
Like
Nick,
there
Nick
was a time when Azul was an adolescent and maybe still kind of working on some of his jerkiness. And like, so if we were out on a trail walk and he was doing forward momentum up a hill one time, so he was actively tasking, and my daughter grabbed his leash as well. Now she didn't take it away from me, right? It was there was another dog that was going to be a problem that was totally out of control that was coming right at us, and she wanted Azul to know that even though I was weak, he was not going to be moving toward that other dog that was going to most definitely bark and lunge in our direction, right? So she saw that emergent situation that could happen and knew I wasn't necessarily feeling good. And so instead of taking it away, she was offering Azul that support of, I'm here, we got you. There's one of us on each side. And so I want them to be able to know when that is a need. I don't want them just to take my dog and decide that it's their turn to walk the dog. Right?
and that's one of the nice things about when you have a dog that's basically trained to be off leash. That so Shauna, I don't know that you know this, but Penny and I both have, and I think Ashlyn, I think basically everybody here has pretty strong feelings about the dog needs to be on leash unless you're in a situation where
Actively tasking in a task that requires the off leash. We are very prone, like, we don't even like dropping the leash and walking away, whether it's for testing a downstay purpose or
Yeah.
whether it's for, doing a specific task. Like, I might drop my dog's leash in the doctor's office when I'm getting on the scale because it's a nice, safe place, or when we're in the exam room and nobody's there and I know my dog's tucked and they're not going to move. But I have the ability to step on it if need be, right?
right.
So I
Hands
might
free
drop my
leashes are a
leash in
thing.
some
Yeah.
controlled
So
environments,
we're all for
but we're not for off leash.
we're
Well, because I need this one task that's off leash, I'm gonna have my dog off leash all the time.
right. So on the other side of that, we still want our dogs trained to basically be off leash.
Yeah.
That's
So
what the shoulder strap is for.
that's
I don't want to
right.
treat it like a leash, but we have that connection should we need it.
Yeah.
Right. So we're pro keep your dog on leash. We are so I like the fact that I have Nick trained so that pretty much, unless I need him for momentum pulls, he's like right there with me and staying with me. Unless he's, well, we've actually fixed the problem. I told you he was on leash restriction, and we've pretty much fixed that. He's just about to get off the leash restriction. He was on a 4-foot leash restriction because he kept dragging everybody but me. So, because I found out other people were allowing that to happen. So, I fixed the problem for me. So I'm going to put him back on the retractable for potty breaks. But, you know, we want our dogs moving and being in communication with us and paying attention with us. And I think that, you know, if passing the leash cues the dog that instead of paying attention to the handler, I'm going to pay attention to the alternate handler. I think that's a good skill for the dog to have. Like, I know, like, when I take Earl's leash, Earl does pay more attention to me. And when Julie has Nick's leash, he pays more attention to her. He's usually looking for cookies because we both tend to give the other person's dogs way more cookies. But that's more because I'm going to do something with, usually because I'm going to do
I
something.
teach her very strong. I'm going to pass the leash signal. So my
Yeah,
dog knows who they're listening to in that moment.
right. But
That doesn't mean they stop listening to me just because I pass the leash, but it means they're supposed to listen to the person holding the leash.
it means that they are not supposed to be trying to get away with things that they might otherwise try to get away with. So, anyways,
Yes, that verbal communication. If my dog is trying to, like, say we're doing training with an alternate handler, and my dog is trying to push the boundaries or, walking too far out in front when they know they should be walking, more toward the back, I might remind them, back up, you're too far out. Or, with Belle, my cue is usually get close, which brings her back in a little bit closer to me. But, even though an alternate handler may have my dog, if I'm in the area, I want my dog to still be paying attention to me.
well,
Um,
since I've been paying more attention to the postural cues that we've been using for things like front and for pivots, I've noticed that Nick is really watching those postural cues to see, okay, what is she doing? How is she standing? You know, is she standing to tell me to be in front of her, or is she telling me to stand that I need to pivot into her? And it's really interesting to watch how much they pay attention, where it's not necessarily a specific, it's a cue, but
I know what you're saying. So I call them all hand signals anyways, although it may not necessarily be a hand signal, but that's the easiest way for other people to understand. They're really body language cues. My dogs pay very close attention to my body language. That's how they follow me in their loose heel. That's
well,
how they
the
know
thing
what
is,
to do with many tasks, and
these
that's how I can get them in any position around me at any given time is simple body movements.
Right. Well, these particular cues, I like the way Hannah describes it. It's like when you're riding dressage with a horse and you're giving a constant communication with the horse on what the horse is supposed to be doing in any given moment, but nobody is the cues aren't necessarily obvious. So like the cue for heel is something that you maintain and sustain, and the dog knows that as long as your hand is in a certain position and your feet are moving a certain way, that they're supposed to be in a certain position and following that position. So I'm really
Yep, it's just easiest to call them hand signals for,
uh,
for people to understand. But
most
yeah, like I have some foot signals. If my foot does this, you do that.
right,
If my foot does
exactly.
that, or if my knee does that, I've got a signal. So like if they're in between my legs, I'll slightly tap Belle with the knee on the side I want her to return to heel in. Because
Mm-hmm.
she can return to heel on either side. So like if I want her to return to heel on right, I'll tap her with my right knee. If I want her to return to heel on left, I tap her with my left knee. And it's just it's such a small move that nobody else even sees my leg move. It's more like a little bit of a pressure than a tap kind of thing. But she knows. And I
Right.
think that's really important. Like, I don't think we can expect alternate handlers to know all of that subtleness.
They're
I want
not.
them to know enough to be able to be safe in the environments that they might be an alternate handler in. right?
That's all they need to
Safety
know.
is our first concern.
That's all they need to know. I mean, I don't expect the same. I don't expect Ferrari level cues from an alternate handler. I assume that the alternate handler is going to have Pinto level driving skills for my dog, not Ferrari level driving skills. And
Right.
so I don't expect them to have all the subtlety and and have the dog respond the same way that they would for me, unless it's somebody that I know has those level of skills, like,
Then they can ask a little bit more.
they can,
Yep.
well, there's certain people that if I handed the leash to, that I know would probably get more out of Nick than I would be able to do.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, where are they on their training journey? Where are we on our training journey? And
I know what you mean, because like Athena and I will say that we can take a client's dog, even this, new client whose dog is just starting training, and we can get him to do some advanced stuff. It doesn't mean the client can get him to do the basic level of that stuff.
right.
We have very clear body language because we've spent so long perfecting it that it's easy for dogs to interpret. And then it's teaching that. All right, I have to go. Does anybody have any one last thing on alternate handlers that they think is important that they want to stress?
It
Big
can be,
thing, check your state laws because
it can
no
be,
federal laws allow access. However, state laws may have specific requirements or may not, or may afford more access or may not, all kinds of different things like that. So make sure you check your state laws, especially if you have a service dog in training as well, because all the in training laws are state impacted, not federally driven.
the other thing is, if in doubt, get a copy of the ADA FAQ is really easy to pull up. And if in doubt, if you don't know what the federal laws are and you are using an alternate handler, you can pull up the FAQ and find out what the federal laws are. It doesn't say a whole lot about it, but often it's referring to like a parent with a child, or somebody like in Julie's situation where she just needs somebody to hold the leash for her. She's doing all the stuff with Earl. So
All right, so it is super important to make sure your alternate handlers have that training, the basic necessity of training. And I would suggest that if you don't have an alternate handler and you're listening to this replay, think about what those basic skills are that you need that alternate handler to learn. And then think about who in your circle might be good at communicating with your dog, right? So pick those first when you're looking towards like maybe training a new alternate handler. What is their skill level going to be? And, are you going to teach them just the basics of can they get my dog out to potty? Or are you going to teach them the full on, can they take my dog for a long exercise walk? Can they take my dog out of a public place? And so we need to do as much training with our alternate handlers, maybe not like hours worth of training, but we need to do the training with our alternate handlers that, just like we do. So we teach our dogs to heel. We have to teach our alternate handlers how to teach our dogs to heel, right? Not necessarily teach it, but how do they ask for it? And how do they maintain it, right? So walking through those kinds of things. All right, with that, let's wrap this up. Our next discussion is going to be um, looking really quickly. October 15th, 3 p.m. And what is our
Central.
topic? Yeah, 3 p.m. Central. Oh, and our topic is conversation. Nope, that's our general topic. Sorry. We have a topic for next month. I just don't remember what it is.
Right. Shauna, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's terminology. Can we create a terminology that we all agree on? Because like we don't necessarily all agree on say positive reinforcement, because a lot of positive reinforcement doesn't set boundaries or expectations.
Clicker training, because there's people who use punishment and clicker training.
Yeah, so I mean there's a lot of terms that
Positive.
have been
positive punishment.
diluted or used the wrong way or whatever, that don't hold the meaning. Even to say we use ethical dog training, everybody has their own ethics. So what I find ethical, Cindy may not find ethical. I know we're pretty much aligned, but may not. But they're still ethical because they're ethical according to their beliefs. That's the problem with ethics. Everyone's beliefs are their beliefs, right? So even the balanced trainers who use a lot of force-based training believe they're doing ethical dog training. In their mind, they're doing the best ethical training they can be doing. And we wouldn't consider that ethical at all, right? So can we kind of talk about terminology and what that means and what it, maybe what it should mean, and kind of come up with some common terminology that we think would benefit the service dog community? That's our next conversation topic. All right, so we will see you all next month.
Thank you for joining us, Shauna.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Lauren.
Nice to meet you, Shauna.
Yeah, thanks for